Cool. I think we are live, everybody, which is fantastic stuff. Welcome everybody to this like muggy and rainy afternoon in the UK. I hope everything's okay. Hello, Caroline. I can see you there. Bright and say bright and early, but it's 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Okay, let's just do some sound checks real quick. I think everything is working fine as I currently observe it. But I want to make sure everyone can hear and see me okay. So if you're watching this on Zoom, let me know in the chat whether the audio and video is okay. Thank you, Brett. We're also live streaming this in a number of places. So you might be watching this on Geeta's LinkedIn, actually. So if you're one of those people that connected to Geeta, you can hear, let me know in the comments there. We should be live streaming this on Facebook, Twitter, and the Brain Food Live company page as well. Okay, it looks like everything's working, which is all great. Folks, some housekeeping as we start. You know how to use Zoom by now, I hope. Please make use of the chat feature and the questions. If you need to have any questions answered by the crowd, pop them in the Q&A section there. We'll get to them at the end of the session. And when you're talking on chat, make sure that you default to everyone when you post, because I think Zoom does default to host and panelists first. And that basically means no one else can see what you're saying. So post to everyone. Let's keep it nice and open so everyone can see what they're saying. Okay, excellent. Let's welcome our panelists first of all. In fact, no, let's throw it over to Dan first. Dan, wonderful to have you. Thank you again from myself and the rest of the panelists for sorting out these amazing webinars. Why don't you quickly introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about TriPad Grow.
Yeah, no problem at all. So I'm Dan. I'm a solutions consultant at TriPad. So I've been with TriPad for maybe 9 months now. So fairly new to the world of recruitment, but I feel I've got a good understanding of it now from speaking to experts in the sector. So my job is to support SMEs from 0 to 1,000 employees with our product TriPad Grow. And I think, where it really fits in with today is, mastering stakeholder management in recruitment can be done via a platform like TriPad, from leveraging, the platform's capabilities to sort of streamline communication, collaboration and data management. And, firstly, utilizing TriPad's features for, seamless communication, ensures that all stakeholders, including, hiring managers, recruiters and candidates stay connected throughout the recruitment lifecycle. So, the platform's really centralized communication tools, help facilitate like real-time updates, feedback sharing, status tracking, allowing stakeholders to remain informed and engaged at every stage of the process. And I think secondly, TriPad's data management capabilities play a pivotal role in, effective stakeholder management. The platform's analytics and reporting features allow stakeholders to, access critical recruitment metrics and insights. The data-driven approach aids, informed decision-making and allows organizations to refine their recruitment strategies. And, really showcasing the recruitment's team performance to key stakeholders, which is super important. And, utilizing TriPad's sort of robust data management tool will empower your stakeholders to assess the efficiency of the recruitment process and also identify those areas for improvement and align those strategies with organizational objectives as well.
Yeah, you know what, Dan? I think that's underrated. The availability of the technology that tracks behavior and tracks outcomes, because that's a big part of how we negotiate with stakeholders. Ultimately, we don't want to do that. We want to just expose the data and have the work prove itself for us. But yeah, wonderful to see TriPad get involved in this segment of the market. We just had a little bit of a laugh about some of the early tooling that was out there. Shout out to all of the Bonded App guys back in the day on premise. This is pre-cloud on premise. ATSs. Okay, let's get on with the show. Let's say hello to our wonderful guest, Grace. Why don't you introduce yourself, what it is you do?
Hi, my name's Grace. I've been in recruitment about coming up to 10 years now. Time really is flying, and there's been a huge amount of change since I first started. I have a background in product tech recruitment, been across agency, consultancy, and big tech, and now I'm at a scale up.
Fantastic stuff, Grace. And we've got Geeta Selly here as well. Geeta, wonderful to see you. Who are you? What it is you do?
So I am Geeta Selly. I head up our talent acquisition for Loadsmart. We are a US-based company. We are logistics tech and helping our customers move more with less. So automating how trucking and the industry works, supply chain. It isn't sexy, but it is. And so my background is essentially I went from being in sales into recruitment, pivoted, not very different. And I've been in recruiting for, I think it's 8 years now, but having started on agency and then coming to Loadsmart and having to completely understand internal recruitment. Two different games, but objective is always the same: hire amazing human beings.
Do you know what, Geeta? Let's start there, because I do think that because of the journey that most recruiters go on has been from agency side to in-house. That's one of the big changes that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, folks. If you're watching this, I mean, would you start off as an agency recruiter before you moved in-house? Let me know in the comments there. I think most of us did. I would estimate it could be as high as 80% as the classic career track that people end up doing in-house work. What would you say is the primary difference in terms of stakeholder management from working agency side to in-house? Because let's not forget, a lot of the people watching this show are going to be making that move for the first time. That's how you get in with an SMB, a small company. They hire someone who's agency side first. You're in as an in-house recruiter. What would you say are the biggest differences in your own experience moving from managing a big, you're doing stakeholder management when you're doing a lot of customer management as an agent compared to doing the relationship management in-house? What's the difference there? Grace, let's go to you with that firstly.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is on accountability. When you are in-house, there is no hiding from the most difficult roles. There's no hiding from your stakeholders who might be in the same office, on the same Slack channel, and you need to have that approach kind of built into how you work with your partners. I think the one thing I really found quite confronting when I moved from agency is that and my experience of how stakeholders would work with me as an agent, I was a service provider and they were potentially working with 2 or 3 other service providers. When I moved in-house and I was first head of talent on site, the buck stops with me and I'm the be-all and end-all person who is responsible for who's coming into the company, what those processes look like, and actually having to take a real steer on managing the expectations of the business in terms of looking at their kind of headcount plans, but translating that into what's realistic.
Does that mean that basically as a recruitment agent, as a third-party supplier, you're saying that actually because there is competition, there was kind of less pressure in a way, in the sense that, yes, I want to be the exclusive supplier here, but I don't really mind as a competitor because they're getting service. They get the customer at the end is getting service. They're not going to be on the end of the phone hammering me for this, that, the other. Whereas that obviously isn't the case when you're in-house.
I think the thing is, when you're in an agency, as much as it's amazing to have one primary client that you are servicing all of their needs and you're their go-to person, it's very dangerous as an agency recruiter to be putting all your eggs in one basket. And suddenly, I've seen this in my career where a company one day wakes up, fires all of their contractors, and brings everything in-house immediately, and your whole desk could go if you're very reliant on one contractor. So I think and one client. So I think as an agent, you have to make sure you're diversifying your desk across multiple clients. You're invested in your stakeholders, but you can't make your entire day just servicing one client. And I think that's the difference of moving in-house, that you have to really shift your approach from servicing multiple businesses to actually zoning in on what are the business objectives of the company that you're in, what are their goals, and how is your role going to help get them towards these goals.
Yeah, big shift. And by the way, folks, no one's going to welcome the image of, running away from clients, but as agents, you definitely did that. I remember you dodge it, you know what I mean? Emails come in, you know what, I'm going to look at that tomorrow because I want this to go away. Whereas actually, if you're literally on site, and pre-COVID, that's what the case would be. In-house recruiter, clues in the name. You're going to be on site, no escape. Maybe a little bit different with push to remote, but these days with things like Slack and Teams, you can't really dodge the accountability. Geeta, tell me about how you moved into sort of from agency side to in-house. Did you encounter this sort of revelation that, oh my goodness, you can't run away from these customers? And how did you kind of handle it in your own kind of mindset, if you like? How did you get over this idea that, okay, fleeing isn't an option anymore?
So I feel like even on the agency side, when I had customers or clients, right, we were a boutique cybersecurity firm, right? So we only had a number of clients. So I had to learn their business as it was. And what I realized was when I learned their business, spoke their language, I actually had a seat at the table with them. They listened to me. So I took that same practice into when I went internal. So I learned the business. I networked with as many of the stakeholders. I networked with their team. So instead of what I did on the agency side where I just knew the leaders, I then went internal and spoke to people on the ground, really understanding the job, what it is that I'm hiring for, so that when I was talking to stakeholders, whether it was up or down, managers, directors, VPs, I was able to talk about their business. And I think that almost got me an instant seat at the table where I'm like, okay, I know your business. I've taken the time to learn it. It's logistics. I'm using the same language. I'm asking you questions when I don't. I'm allowing myself to be vulnerable when I have to. And they appreciated that. So I think I took that same methodology. Now, the difference obviously was if you think about agency, you can get it wrong. You can make the wrong hire. You get paid and you're like, all right, they don't like us. We'll move on to the next customer. When you're in-house, you make the wrong hire after 6 months. It's almost like the magnifying glass is on you. Well, you hired this person, even though it's a partnership, but you hired the person. So there's, again, talking about what Grace said, there's that accountability, but on the side of once someone's in the job. And I think that sometimes that was hard to get used to, right? Because not everyone gets it right. You're an agency recruiter, you come in and you hire all these people, and then suddenly you're like, actually, that wasn't right. What can I learn from that? And as long as you're honest with your stakeholders, actually, I look back, this is what we should have done different. Now going into this, we should do this as a team. That approach has really helped me. And bear in mind, I've been at LoadSmart for 4.5 years. I was their first US recruiter. I helped create that foundational process and everything. So, now I have that leg to stand on. Now I can look back and be like, right, well, this is where we went wrong. Let's try this. Let's do this. And really having learned from that. Yeah.
It's hard to recover from. There's another thing called it's never happened to me, thankfully, but you can imagine getting these bad hires wrong early, but they're also literally sitting there as well. So it's not like that's invisible. It's like you're coming into the office back again. This is pre-COVID, coming back in the office, and those bad hires may be doing low performing stuff in the office as you're the person that brought them in. So yeah, very difficult. So accountability, key issue, and a key difference. What kind of techniques in terms of improving stakeholder management is required here? Danny's already mentioned, look, you can do the stats, you can kind of use tooling and what have you, but once you're in as the first time recruiter, first time they've hired you for this role, how do you make sure that the relationships you have really set off in the right footing? I mean, is there a go-to technique, or are you just relying on your charisma, Grace?
Can try. I think the thing there is it's very important to get those early relationships right, set a tone for what that relationship will look like and ways of working. But without a doubt, building a rapport with hiring partners, who are they as people? What are their career ambitions? Where does their, what's their team's, how does their team fit into the bigger picture of the organization? And I think I read Deb Louise, she has this 30 days in a new role, and she calls it the listening tour. And as a person and as a recruiter, when you do a lot of talking, for me, that it's very challenging to go into a new role and, you know, be quiet and listen and observe what's going well, what's not gone well, what's, you know, what are their hopes and dreams for what their recruitment process will look like, and just taking some time really just to do a bit of a litmus test of the environment, and get to know people and their motivations.
Should you formalize that to say, hey, 30 days I'm going to be spending listening, or is it more a case of, look, you're coming in, there's already jobs you need to fill, etc. You know, you can't be doing like the McKinsey consultant type approach. You've got to get in there as well. So how formal should this period be where you're, hey, listen, I want to learn about your business? Any thoughts on that, Geeta?
I mean, if you think about it, right, you always have that 30, 60, 90-day plan, right? Your 30 days is really actively listening to the business, asking questions, being extremely curious. Your 60 days is digging deeper and being able to understand it and reiterate that information. And then your 90 days is you being able to say, hey, I know how to do this. These are plans that I'm putting in, and starting to execute, right? So in all honesty, I think first 60 days you're learning. Now, if you're thrown in and you're told, right, you have to learn this now, then you have to, I guess, push the speed button and learn as much as you can, right? Put it on yourself. What can I learn on a daily basis? Put a plan together. In 30 days, I need to be here. Who do I need to speak to? If these are roles I have to hire, what do I need to know to make me an expert? So in 30 days, I can then go and deliver. So I think that's the approach that I take. That's the approach that when I've hired in recruiters, guys, this is what you're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And this is how we're going to execute. So when you're moving fast, that's what you have to do. If you're a leader coming into that role, you should set the expectation to your leadership team. It's going to take me 90 days to get to where you want me to be. I will get you here, and be transparent to what you can deliver. Because if you say, yeah, I can do this, and then you under deliver, you already lose trust. You already lose that piece that you're trying to get with the stakeholders and the leadership team.
Very good point. So if that isn't mapped out for you, you've got to bring the map to the stakeholders. It should be part of your recruitment process, of course, but sometimes it isn't. You know, but it should be, okay, what are the 30-day objectives? What are the 60-day objectives? What are the 90-day objectives?
Yeah.
That's what you got to worry about for the first. In fact, that's probably the end, no more than this, because you don't even know where that future is going to be. It kind of aligns with your probation period as well. So you've got to understand what does success look like from the people that are hiring you, and then the people that you're working with, which oftentimes the same people, but sometimes not. Okay, very, very good. With regards to recruitment, by the way, isn't not happening. The fact that you, in a sense, obviously, this company's grown to a size already without you being there, or without anybody being there. Therefore, they've recruited, right? There's no question that's occurred. There's a good chance that when you've been hired, is say, oh, look, here's 10 vacancies that currently we're recruiting for, and here's like 100 candidates that are through this process. Can you drop into these interviews? That's probably what's going to happen. So you can't say no to that. You got to get involved. But what's the sort of thing you need to achieve here? Or actually, do you just pause it and say, okay, stop, everybody, we're starting all over again, and play that type of card? Or do you say, right, let's learn how current flow is, and then see where the improvements might come, at some risk that you may end up just being like absorbed into their way of doing things? Because you can imagine what might happen, can't you, guys? It'll be like, oh yeah, can you do this interview, Grace? Or Hung, can you take this one on? Before you know it, you're doing like 50 hours a week doing all this stuff that other people set up, and you've got no time actually to implement any process. So how do you manage an existing process? Let's face it, been set up by non-recruiters, and probably you've been brought in because it's not optimized. Grace?
Yeah, I think one of the first things I always think about when businesses are bringing in their first recruiter, often they're bringing them in a little bit too late, and there's embedded process, which is not best practice, already there. I think often when you interview, it's always, we have to sell ourselves as, this is what we can do, this is what I'll deliver, you've got 20 roles you want me to fill immediately. I although in an ideal world, pause, let's regroup, build the right process for the organization. That's in an ideal, fantasy land to the kind of conversations I have with a lot of people on a daily basis. I think for me, I look at getting in for 2 weeks, and as long as they're not doing anything illegal, I will go through their process. I will follow the process through. I'll understand how they're working. And I always carry around with me a notebook. I'm very old school of writing down like things that just come to me as I'm taking candidates through this. I tend to try and sit in on some interviews as well. So I can see, I might not have a clue what's going on or what the discussion is, but looking at, are we being consistent in the interview format? What kind of and type of questions are we using? Are we using any kind of skills-based or structured interviewing questions? And just really getting a bit of a benchmark as to where actually are we? Because I've joined companies where they've said, our process is up here, we're doing a really good job. And I've sat in some of the interviews and thought, goodness me, we need to, make some real change here and put in a lot more structure. So I think it's really absorbing and embedding yourself and making it clear to the team that in 2 weeks, you're going to come back with thoughts, recommendations. Often with businesses that are growing and bringing in their head of talent, there is not necessarily the time to take especially in Europe with very long time to hires at a senior level. It's quite damaging to pause for 2 weeks, although, it could be preferential. A lot of the work that I've done is about optimizing, tweaking, piloting different things and kind of test and learn, not going in and reinventing the wheel, because I think that also can make people a little bit nervous. They can be a bit protective of things that they've built.
That's a very good point, because sometimes you might see some obvious errors in recruiting process or obvious inefficiencies, but that's being evolved or being grown by somebody in that business, and they may actually have an emotional attachment to it. Don't get me wrong. I think a lot of people they're very thankful that you're going to come in with a clean, fresh approach and a more efficient way. But there's going to be some people that have invested huge amounts of time, and this is the way we do things. And remember, this topic is about stakeholder management. You coming in and immediately trashing how they've done things, even if it is a inefficient way, is probably not great for relationship building. So that's not to say it shouldn't be off the table, because as you say, Grace, if it's illegal or if it really is counterproductive or it's deleterious in other major ways to the business, you got to make that decision. But most of the time it's just simply going to be suboptimal, in which case, can you optimize it, and can you maybe suggest a better way? And perhaps for future roles that are created in that function or that department, you can say, okay, we're going to try and roll it out in this way. We think it's going to be more efficient than it was previously, something to that effect. How do you identify people that are problem stakeholders, Geeta? You walk into a room, even people like you walk into a room, there's going to be people that like you, some people that hate you, right? There's everyone is going to have variable a kind of interest in your project or your mission, and you've got to try and work with them all, because they may all be hiring managers, may all be stakeholders. What's your policy on that? Are you a universalist to say, look, here's the one treatment for everybody, I want everyone to do this? Or do you kind of pick and choose and say, you know what, that person's an easy touch, that's fine, they're going to do what I say? Or this person's super difficult, I need to put extra time to build relationship there?
To put it this way, everyone loves me. And that's a joke. So finance normally is the bane of my life. Even though my finance guys, I love them, they love me. Took a minute to get there. So funnily enough, having come from sales, I learned something a very long time ago that has stuck with me. And one of my sales gigs, we used to use DISC on how to assess customers and how to communicate, right? So I still feel like I go into a room.
Stop, press, dumb it down for me, Geeta. What does DISC mean?
So DISC, so it's I think some of us have used it. It's the assessment, the behavioral and emotional assessment that a lot of us use within some of our recruitment processes as well. So it's like trying to figure out if someone is dominant, an influencer, a steady, or a conscientious type of person. So if you have a dominant, they're going to be the kind of people that are going to be assertive, direct. A lot of CEOs tend to be dominants, right? So you have your influencers who think politicians, people that love people and want to talk to people, are your extroverts, want to win you over. You have your steadiness, those people that are empathetic and really want to care about the people and just are a bit slower to the touch and just want a different pace. And then you have your conscientious, who are going to be data driven, very logical, straight to the point. Don't give me a story, tell me the numbers. So normally I'll walk into a room and I'll try and figure out what those personality types are. So if I'm speaking to someone that is very conscientious, and I might know from their role, right? If they are in finance, they're an analyst, I know already that you're going to want to see numbers. You're going to want bullet points straight to the point, right? If I'm speaking to CEO, you want 3 bullet points. What does this mean? What am I going to do? How am I going to get there? If you are someone that's a more of a steady, right? That S, I'm going to nurture you. I need to build trust with you as a person. So I'm going to ask you about your family and understand you as a person and then go in. So there's a lot of ways that you would work with the people that you're in a room with, put in that situation, right? And I've taught my team this and it's really worked, right? When you go in and I know at first people are like, well, you're just, I guess you're biased on how you think. You're not, right? It's just a way to communicate. And from there, you can then pull in the art of persuasion, where you kind of you're able to establish that credibility with these people because you know what kind of where they fit. Then you're able to frame the goals and how you're both going to get there, right? As a party, you're both going to get there. And then use the data, reinforce that data and the evidence you have, and then put in the emotional touch. Hey, listen, finance, we know we got to get there, right? The business needs this and we're going to lose here and it's going to affect us both. And we all want to go home on time, right? Okay, so let's do this. So there's a number of ways that you can do it. So there's no one way of communicating. You have to figure out how you can communicate with a number of people very quickly. And I think if you can start getting that basis, it's really helped me through my sales career, and it's really helped me build that in my career now. And I've taught my team and I see it's really helping them. So that's my go-to. And I feel that really works for me.
No, that's really good. It's basically application of a sales methodology because you got to do an internal sales job, don't you? You're going to get some people that have really evangelized about this role and maybe even evangelized about you. There may be people that have been in the interview process. There's other individuals out there that either weren't involved or, had other favorites or other solutions, and suddenly you are the outcome, and then maybe suboptimal. So being able to identify who those folks are and then have a strategy towards them makes perfect sense. Where do you spend the time though, Grace? Do you spend the time on the person that is an antagonist and try and turn them around, or do you think, actually, I'm going to leave this guy alone for a bit. I want to work with a person that's an advocate and make sure I get some success with this person, and then use that as a way forward. What's your personal approach? I don't think there's a right or wrong, but I'm interested to know how you do it.
I think it's finding the balance of what's right for the organization that you're in. If this antagonistic person is at a very senior level, which they do typically tend to be that person, for me, that is where I'm spending my time, because I've experienced leadership like that. And when you get it right, they are your biggest ally. But when you get it wrong, obviously it can be very challenging. I think the thing for me that's worked very well with dealing with antagonistic stakeholders who potentially are not on board with change, process change, is actually take recruitment out of it, understand what are their goals, what are they trying to achieve, and then bringing back in, how does the people strategy align to that? That is everything from, talent management internally and growing their own team, as well as bringing people into the team. Because ultimately, we all want the same end goal. We all want to meet business objectives. Certain people want to hit specific performance goals that they can't do without their team being in the right place. It's understanding what is motivating that person, what are their challenges, what are their issues on a day-to-day that we can help solve, and actually really sharing a little bit of what are the challenges within recruitment, what are the people challenges that we're trying to solve for. And I think sometimes people can become very antagonistic stakeholders to recruitment when either they've had negative experiences in the past or they do not think they've been listened to. So part of my kind of listening tour is actually sitting down with people and understanding what are their experiences without asking leading questions, just learning from where they're at and where they would like to be and where my role can kind of slot in with regard to what they're trying to achieve. So I go for the antagonist.
No, I like it a lot. And by the way, folks, where are you familiar with some of the imagery that we're kind of creating with this this dialogue? Have you encountered an antagonistic stakeholder in your recruitment career? And what did you do about that? And did you solve it? I mean, sometimes it's not solvable. But I think the key point, Grace, you're making, I think, really interesting, is that you got to take sometimes the personality out of it. It may not be a personality thing. It could be sometimes, but let's just say you've got to presume it isn't in order to move forward. And even take the recruitment out of it. It's not your thing. That's the primary issue. It's their thing. So learn what that thing is. And that involves just spending time. So even off agenda type of conversations are useful. This is part of the reason why I think the shift to remote is a big challenge, actually, because back in the day, when you're in office, you're 40 hours a week in a small office, you're going to be in line of sight of a lot of these people. So I'm imagining an organization, sub 100 size or whatever it might be when you first join, first recruiter. There's a good chance that you're in line of sight with a lot of those people day in, day out. You've got to, almost by default, you'll build relationships. Shift to remote, I think, increases the stakeholder management challenge. Correct or not?
Yeah. One thing I was just going to add to that is, and this is where tools have never become more important, using tools to be more accountable, share reporting, give visibility. Someone can't walk over to my desk, but they can look straight into my ATS and see where we're at, what the data looks like, and really understand without even having to speak to me where we're at.
Well, let's talk about relationship building in a remote setting. So Geeta, very relevant to you as well, given the fact you're now physically away, geographically away. So a little bit different in the sense you might have already built relationships with stakeholders now, but what kind of techniques do you think are important when you're remote and you've never been in office? Like, I think that's a common experience, perhaps, for the modern recruiter. So how do you go ahead and build relationships that are so important?
So we've hired people while I've been remote. Don't forget COVID. We had lots of leadership during COVID. I've never met them, but I make it a point to have coffee breaks. And those coffee breaks are not talking about work. It's talking about their family, how they're doing, what's going on, just so that I can actually have that human element. I don't know about you guys, right? No one went into recruitment just to fill roles. We like people. We enjoy talking to people most of the time, right? I love talking to people. So any excuse to have a coffee with someone is my go-to. So that's been one of the ways that I maintain that. And one of the questions I always ask is, so from a recruitment perspective, what is it that you want to see? Is it monthly? And try and understand what their picture looks like and build that into my plan, right? So I can create a report and I'll send that to you on a monthly basis. I'll send it to you on a weekly, and it should be automated because that's what I can do. So once I get to know them, right, I'm building that rapport, I'm understanding how they work. And so I'm gaining that trust. And that's how I've worked so far. And I think for the last 2.5 years, it's really worked for me. So yeah, I think that's my go-to.
No, really, really insightful point. So you can, firstly, two things, Geeta. It's like, number one, spend time. Yeah. So I know that recruitment feels like it needs to be hyper optimized all the time, and every single second counts, etc. That's the pressure. You should always, be searching candidates. Yes, that's all true, but you need to carve out time to build relationships. Yeah. And the way to do that is actually to have a non-agendaed connection, which in office you can easily do. You can go for a lunch. You can just bump into people, even strategically, hover over desk, etc. You can do all that. But outside of when you're remote, you have to be a bit more deliberate, because you got to be able to say, hey, let's learn a little bit more about where you're coming from on XYZ. And having a one-to-one conversation, I think, is not unusual for someone coming into a new role, interacting with stakeholders, but make sure that definitely happens and doesn't slip, because it can slip, because you can get dragged into operational stuff, and then before you know it, you're in it, and that's not no bueno, as they say. I love the fact you can ask people, what do you expect from me, or what do you expect from this new function that we're building here, because we can't assume what that is. I mean, they may be thinking, oh, not much, or they may be thinking, actually, I want you to put us in this position, and we're struggling to hire these elite people. I want you to solve that. So ask what they expect, and then ask them how do they get information about that. So I love the fact you then build into your weekly report the input from the hiring managers or the stakeholders about what they wanted to see. Like, if they wanted to see, look, I want to see us build brand amongst these engineers, great. Find a way in which, that information or that metric can be put into a report on terms of your brand perception in that group, or whatever it is. I want to see more candidates apply. Great. It's an easy one. You can track how many people come into flow. So ask individual managers what it is that they're looking for. I'm intrigued by this idea of a weekly report, Geeta. What do you mean by this? Can you explain what this is? Where do you deploy it? Who sees it?
Yeah. So for example, finance, right? No one's really ever asked them what they want. So, hey, finance, what is it that you need from us? Well, we'd love to know how many recs are open, because we get confused. We have hiring managers reaching out to all of us at so many different times, and we know we're saying yes to this, and suddenly we're not sure we said yes to it, right? Because it seems like the same role, but it's a different role. So now they get a weekly report from our ATS that gives them a breakdown of the roles that are open, the roles that have closed, and the roles that are pending, right? So they have a clearer vision. And I also asked, okay, what is it that you don't want, right? So you don't need to have like all the extras that come with recruiting. They don't want to know what our time to hire. They don't want to know certain averages or how many phone calls are made. They need those basic numbers. So I know I can pull that from my ATS and send that to them. I have other weekly reports which are totally the opposite: the time to hire, what we're doing, how we're doing it, that can go to my leader, so she knows what's going on. So I think if you can adapt your reports and send those out weekly, that's great. Now, the question is, are they looking at them? And so this is when I have my one-on-one coffees. Hey, how's the report doing for you? Are you seeing it? Are you getting what you want from it? Oh, well, honestly, Geeta, I only look at it once a month. All right, so should we just change it so it's not just sitting in your inbox, right? So let's change that, because we want this to be something that you actually go to and ask questions. I'm also that person when one of my leaders says, hey, what's going on here? I'll send the report and say, hey, you get this report every Monday, just so you know. You can always check it, so that you're constantly creating those habits. It's not that they're ignoring it. There's a million things in your inbox, but if they know where to go and you constantly say it, it becomes a habit. And then you're like, oh, Monday, 6 a.m., this comes through. This should be one of the ones here. So I think those are some of the things that and we're still learning, right? I haven't got it down to a T. The last 6 months is where we've been doing a lot of this, and I guess it's working. It's trial and error, right, Grace? I feel like that's something we've discussed in the past, that these are things that you just sort of see how it fits and then go with the flow.
Yeah, and you're working to the level of your hiring manager. For example, I've got hiring managers that have been at the business 15 years. They have far more context than me. With every hiring manager, I do a kickoff, I set up Slack channels, I link the reports, I link a pipeline, so they can just go into that Slack channel for the role and click pipeline. And I've got some hiring managers that will message me saying, what's happening with Laura? What did you think to Steve? And I'll be doing something else and I'll be like, Steve? And they're so engaged in the process. They've been looking at applications that have come in the same day, and they're really hot and they're really on it, and they're right up there in terms of partnership. I've got other hiring managers who need a lot more coaxing and a lot more time invested to get them into this partnership model, because one thing that I reiterate with every hiring manager that I meet is that hiring is everybody's job. I am not the person just serving you up candidates. We need interaction from the hiring managers in terms of working on the JD. Is this accurate? What are the strengths and success criteria for your team? What is the ideal candidate persona, skill set wise, soft skill wise? How are we adjusting the hiring process for this particular role if needed, and really getting them engaged from the very beginning? Yes, some people are resistant to this, and they're, you know, back to our antagonistic stakeholders, they do require a little bit more energy and support. But once you've really been working with hiring managers quite a while, you've set clear expectations, you're managing their expectations really regularly. I've got some that could be leading hiring workshops to other stakeholders now because they really are passionate about the end result of what we're doing and bringing great people into their team and scaling their product area. So I think you have to adjust your approach as to where people are and kind of meet them where they are. There's no point me going into a brand new hiring manager's, you know, kickoff meeting saying this data is all terrible, because they don't understand what that means. So for us, one thing that we've implemented with every single hiring manager, whether you've hired at your past company or not, everybody who comes in here does a hiring workshop on how we hire at Lightspeed, what good looks like here, how recruitment works. And we also push them through a full kind of D&I and unconscious bias training as well. But that really has been super useful in kind of framing expectations on both sides and bringing everybody round to what we do here rather than what 10 different people did at their previous companies that they think works. Obviously, we're always open to taking suggestions and feedback, but it's very much kind of setting everybody up to follow the process that we've got. And I think it's something that when you're in a smaller company can be trickier. However, one resource that I've found super helpful, workable, I've got loads online in terms of how to build out scorecards and how to build out base level interview processes. And I think there's a lot of free tools out there even just to start you off on this right direction if you are that first point of talent.
Don't forget Recruiting Brain Food either. Sign up to the newsletter. It's going to help you. But I tell you what, some really interesting sort of things shared there. Particularly firstly, I like the idea of the routine of a weekly circular, because I think sometimes you can't assume that people know what's going on in your department, particularly if you're distributed or you're remote. Oftentimes people think recruitment is a super mysterious thing. So as you're busy putting together the right kind of tooling to create the transparency internally, there's going to be a kind of a process before you get to that point. So at the very late interim, you kind of can put together a report and distribute it on a regular basis so everyone becomes habituated to it. It's the reason why Brain Food goes out on regular time every week, because I'm trying to habituate the audience. You kind of need to do the same thing internally, and your audience is the stakeholders, the hiring managers, the CEO. They can at least see things that are happening, and guess what? They're going to stop chasing you for reports and updates if you keep pumping this out. So in terms of your workload, it's a little bit now, but you're going to get it back, because it means that the inbound requests will stop happening, and they're not stuff you want, right? You never want the CEO saying, Grace, can you give me a report on your activities? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You never want to see this. This is an email you don't want to receive. So you can preempt it by pushing the information out forward and saying, this is for the company. I want everyone to be aware as where we're at recruiting, and whatnot. Secondly, the idea that you can kind of, I wouldn't say over communicate is the wrong word, because you don't want to be incessant, but I think the difference between communicating the right information to the stakeholders versus bothering people is this information something that they can use and is valuable, versus am I asking someone to do something with this information? Because if it's the latter case, you're just being a pain in the ass. Like, for instance, if I'm sending things to hiring managers and saying, oh, I need you to do this, this, and this, and then they haven't done it, I'm chasing them up afterwards and saying, have you done it? Again, that's not kind of creating the right kind of relationship, right kind of vibe. You're adding work to other people. But if you're saying, hey, listen, here's the pipeline for your role. If you click on this, you can always monitor what the status is in terms of this position, how many candidates are in flow, whether we're in trouble or not. We'll flag it if we are in trouble, etc., etc. They'll welcome that information. They don't have to interact with it or respond immediately. So information they can use that isn't a request or a demand for work. Usually you can send as much as that as possible and people aren't going to be annoyed. Okay, very, very good. Cool. We are flying through this conversation, folks. So if anybody in the crowd here has any questions or any comments to add, please do add them in the chat. If you have any questions, particularly about stakeholder management, do ask them in the Q&A. Because we'll try and get to them. Not to say we're going to solve every problem, but I wonder sometimes you get a couple of more heads to it. It might help in some way. Do you have a problem with stakeholder management? Is there a person right now you're struggling with? If so, ask the question. We're going to see whether we can help you out in that way. Okay. Let's move on in terms of the transparency in the tooling. Grace, going to you here, you mentioned a couple of times that actually, getting people, one of the outcomes of sharing operational recruitment information to stakeholders is that sometimes you get them activated and excited about the activity of recruitment. Can you just explain, circumstances where that happened and why do you think, what's your theory as to why people become activated and engaged in the process as a result of getting this type of information?
Yeah, I think for a lot of the teams that especially I'm working with at the moment, we've really activated a sense of, in terms of, I think why this has come about is that we've had a number of really successful hires, which helps, but they've seen the impact of those successful hires, and that has built a kind of mutual strong relationship, but also excitement about what good recruitment practice and timely recruitment practice can bring. They've been super engaged in going into ATSs, looking at profiles, looking at folk, giving me continual feedback as to what looks good, who we should be thinking about. And I think they feel very empowered by the tools, the fact that they can, it's not just me saying, take this candidate. They feel a sense of ownership with it because the tools have allowed them to get involved at every stage of the process. And I think that empowerment also makes them feel, a lot more valued partners. It's not just me as a recruiter saying, right, this is the person I think is right for your team. It's a super collaborative effort, and having the right tools in place to allow that relationship and allow them to have that connection to the process are really important.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense from a psychological perspective, doesn't it? Like, people are going to be more invested in the process if they feel as if they're contributing some way, or if they have access to it. Back in the day when it's just furnishing people with CVs and saying, right, what do you think of these people? And inevitably, if that's the first time they've actually interacted with their own recruitment, then it's already way too late down the line. You've got to get people involved right at the beginning, expose the process, connect them with the tooling you're using. It doesn't have to be a particularly sophisticated ATS, by the way. If you're still in a spreadsheet, it could be a spreadsheet. Just give them access to the spreadsheet. Do you know what I mean? So that they know what the flow is. Get them bought in and make it visible. And then I think that gets them motivated in moving forward. Okay, cool. Let's talk about some key skills for recruiters to do stakeholder management well. I think a lot of the stuff we've talked about are techniques, which I think absolutely could be used irrespective of your skill set. But what skills do you think should be cultivated as recruiters going into their first role, particularly when it comes to stakeholder management? For example, I'm thinking one of the things that you need to cultivate is, a sense of patience, I think. The idea that you got to sit with people more or less, longer time, less time, depending on the personality or circumstance, in order to get them to kind of understand at a visceral level what the recruitment process is. So that would be one thing I would say is worth cultivating. Cultivate patience, you know. I don't know how you do that. You know, maybe pick up painting or something, I don't know. But what are the skills do you think the recruiters should be cultivating to be great stakeholder managers? Geeta, let's go to you first with this.
So for me, I think the biggest one is obviously active listening, right? Being able to not just hear, listen to what the person is saying, understand what the person is saying, question. But I think listening is that key skill. Let's face it, some of us recruiters, we love talking and we do listen to our candidates, right? But when it comes to the stakeholders, right, we're constantly, I did this and it was great. Just take your time, listen to them. And that does require patience, because sometimes people can talk a lot for a long time. Take that information, make notes. And then when you ask them questions about that, they know that you've listened and already they're engaged because you're engaged.
Active listening, by the way, folks, probably the best training I've ever gone under was an active listening training course. I actually didn't even know what that was. But it's all about learning to be quiet. Like, so many times we want to butt in and we want to contribute our thoughts, and we want to, you know, we get excited by it all. That's all well and good. But active listening is about really understanding what the person is saying, even repeating back your understanding so that they can hear that you've heard them. There's your first step. And the first step is to do that so that that's been registered. And you'll notice that a lot of the frustration disappears if there's an antagonistic relationship. Great deal of it is because we feel as if the other side is listening to us, so we shout harder, and you know that's a path to a very destructive end. So active listening, absolutely something everyone should develop, irrespective of role, but particularly for recruiters wanting to get better at stakeholder management. Grace, how about your thoughts? What other things should recruiters develop as a skill?
I think for me, a sense of perspective is really important, because I think especially when you've come from agency, when you've come from a sales background, often you can be quite laser focused on doing what you need to do to hit your goals and your goals that are connected to your personal performance. When actually, when we are an internal recruiter, the right decision for the business might be separate to our personal goals. You know, let's say we have a candidate, the hiring managers, they're a yes, but they're not completely sure. They're not sure if it's the right team fit. There's a bit of hesitation or some concerns there. For me as a recruiter, if I'm pushing just on, yeah, it's great for my targets if you hire this person, is that the right thing for the business? Potentially not. So I think it's being able to put yourself in your hiring manager's shoes, understand, you know, they have an opinion on something, they have an opinion on the candidate. Why do they have that opinion? What is driving that? How does that fit with where they're at within their team and what their outlook is? Because often as recruiters, we are often having a lot of outbound facing conversations without necessarily getting as involved in the internal kind of team dynamics and team alignments that our hiring managers are. So I think it's really being able to see things from a broader perspective. That also works again when, you know, you might have your finance team saying, oh, we need to delay these hires to Q4, or we need to do this because it's for the longer term health of the business. It may not necessarily align with your goals and your immediate pipeline of talent, but what you really have to be able to do, and it's hard, and it's something that I speak to so many recruiters in the many communities that we're all in, and many of us struggle with it. And it's being able just to step back, take a deep breath, and try and think about the drivers that are motivating others and the outlook that they have. And often, sometimes thinking, actually, where are we going right back to basics? How does this align to the longer term business goals and business growth?
Yeah, very, very good. Okay, we've got some questions we need to go to, so let's hit them right here. I think they've just been popped into the chat, but we can investigate them here. Some of them are actually, I think, very resonant with us. So let's go here with Ms. Ms is saying, okay, what's the panel's advice on working with stakeholders who are very, very unresponsive? So these are people that are receiving submissions, they haven't got back to us. You know, they're just not playing ball. I mean, you can Slack them all the time. Okay, you Slack them and they haven't actually responded to that. Like, what you keep putting exclamation marks in? Like, how do you kind of get them firstly to respond, but also to respect your demands on their time? Both of us going to answer this, but let's go to you first, Geeta.
So I have a habit of just picking up the phone, and I tell my team as well, don't send Slack messages. You're not getting a response, right? Pick up the phone, call them. And each one of our Slacks has a personal number. So I have no issues picking up the phone, giving them a call. Hey, Jason, who is this? Geeta. Oh, you're calling me. Yeah. I haven't heard back from you. What did you think of these candidates? I don't see your notes. We have a meeting this afternoon. Oh, I'll put them in. Right. I kid you not. It works every time. I think they just get worried, or they forget that they had to do it. Or they're like, I haven't had time. It's like, fine, just send me quick notes and I'll just copy and paste them if that's what I need to do. Right. So just try and figure out what their pace is. I don't think they're ignoring us. I think a lot of the times they just, like, we get laser focused on what we do, they get laser focused on the business and their job. So sometimes that's what happens. So again, pick up the phone, put on a coffee break. So any other way to get in front of them to have a chat, and then ask them, what would you prefer?
Yep.
And then teach them, right? You don't need to put in a summary, just put in quick bullet points. That's all you need to do. So small things like that.
Yeah, I think firstly, synchronicity is the key, right? So if you can get them on a synchronous conversation, let's do that, even though that's getting harder and harder to do, because people are, not responding to phones and all the rest of it. But there's a reason why synchronicity is efficient, because it means that you're not creating an email backlog. Email, Slack, it can be the coward's way out. So if you wanted to do something, make sure you have a back channel that isn't that is, you don't abuse that, but so if you overuse that call, it's not going to work. But you need to be able to invoke it here and there. Okay, let's Grace, we might not have time to get your answer on this, so we're going to go to the other question from Lauren. Lauren said, how do you deal with stakeholders you want to establish? Well, it's a similar, but this is slightly different in the sense the first one is about tactical, not responding to stuff that you're doing. The second one is that they haven't given you a chance to establish a relationship. So on your listening tour, they've not been available. They haven't answered the duel. They're just dodging it. How do you go about with this?
There's a really good book. It's called Crucial Conversations. And I think both of these points are very connected to me. The reality is, if you have stakeholders who are not going to establish a relationship with you, you are going to be misaligned on who you're trying to hire. That is going to take longer and have a knock-on impact on their business. If they won't review CVs and accept interviews, you're probably not going to be able to hire somebody, if at all, very quickly. So for me, the expectation management is key. And I think one thing that my current environment, if hiring managers are not being proactive to meet with us, have a kickoff process, we don't work the role because we've set really clear expectations on the commitment needed by hiring managers. And I think the thing is, especially when it's your first in-house role and you're a bit more nervous of, setting really clear boundaries of what recruiters need, you need to develop allyships with those who are really keen to engage with recruiting. But I think I would be, if, they don't want to give you time, I think it's really educating them. Well, if you're not prepared to invest in recruitment, that is going to have a knock-on impact on time to hire, the quality to hire, and the long-term performance and growth of your team, which once you start highlighting this to people, they tend to get a little bit more engaged.
Yeah, and to do this in a way that isn't like a threat in any way, you're simply describing the reality of the situation. To say, look, the closer you're aligned, the more accurate your recruiting effort's going to be, and the more motivated you are to deliver against it. I think we can have that honest conversation. So that's a critical thing. Set your boundaries, and not in a hostile way, but just to have a clear understanding what the exchange is. You're prepared to give A-level effort, but you need to have something back in order for that A-level effort to be valuable for both sides. Okay, folks, we are out of time, everybody. So thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. We could obviously continue talking about stakeholder management, but we are coming off air as we speak. This is the end of our four-part series. I'm very pleased to say there's going to be another four-part series early next year, focusing on the same audience, SMB, first recruiter in. How do we deal with all of the challenges of this underserved market? Bear in mind, most recruiters, where first job is typically in this context. And I think if you look at all of the recruiters out there globally that work in-house, probably over 50% or more are working by themselves in an in-house capacity with no kind of support elsewhere. So this is what this series is all about. Thank you for Tripad for launching this. If you're interested in getting an ATS that's designed for the one-person recruiter, Tripad Grow is the product for you. Okay, I think that's about it. We're about to be cut off without my without my control, so be prepared for a hard stop. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you Grace Carey. Thank you Keita Selly. Thank you Dan Sutcliffe. Thank you everyone for watching.